A time period in Japanese history is named for the main capital city during that time. Accordingly, during the Kamakura period, the capital city was at Kamakura, but there remained a very powerful base at the previous capital of Kyoto. This time period was very unique in Japanese history. The Kamakura period was also a time when the middle class became more prominent and people had more and more time to devote to the arts and to religion. The Kamakura period was a turning point and a time of changes for both Japanese society and Buddhism specifically. New types of Buddhism were formed to meet the needs and ideas of the common people and not just the elites. They focused on salvation and enlightenment to end their suffering. Almost everything about the Kamakura period is unique, from how the new capital came to be at Kamakura, to the movements and religion that went on during it, to the art that was produced during this time. It was a time that has had lasting effects on the culture of Japan and Buddhism in Japan and changed Japanese society into what we know it as today. The Kamakura period started in 1185 when Kamakura became the capital and ended in 1333 when the capital was moved. Kamakura came to be the capital after a war between the courtiers or elites and provincial warriors who were military people and commoners. The warriors won and moved the capital to Kamakura. They placed political power into the hands of the shogunate, or military commanders, which moved to Kamakura. A feudal regime was established by Minamoto Yoritomo. Although the common people had more power and the society was arguably more equal, this was not a politically stable time for Japan. Because of the power struggle between the military and the elite, power kept switching from Kamakura to Kyoto and back again. Kamakura appealed to the common people. Kyoto appealed to the elites. The courtiers were desperate to hang on to power and continued to appoint governors who worked alongside the shogunate. The trend had become feudal control at every level of society, and when the elite's power was diminished by the warriors, the courtiers had to find new ways to remain the elite class. Many of them turned to poetry and other arts. Elite men studied poetry and other art forms, as they do in a lot of countries, to keep their elite status. Poetry can now be considered an elite activity. Also, elites were traditionally the only people wealthy enough to collect art or to have artists come to their homes. However, with a growing middle class, the common people of the Kamakura period were the first to have real leisure time to devote to the arts and to religion. Former common religions were for the upper class, but during the Kamakura period, new types were developed or rediscovered, as was the case with Pure Land Buddhism, that were more practical for the masses. These new movements of the Kamakura period were responding in complex ways to long-standing tendencies and problems of the older traditions. During the Kamakura period, Buddhism was for the first time spread to all corners of the country. Buddhist priests played a role in all of society, not just religion, which is why Buddhism was so important during this time period, because religion and other aspects of Japanese culture were so corresponding. The reason that the Kamakura period was a turning point in Japanese history is that the new political leadership opened the way for Buddhism to spread directly to the mass population instead of hoarding it among the upper class. The Kamakura period was especially important to Japanese Buddhist history because three main types of Buddhism were developed during the Kamakura period that are still the most widespread denominations practiced in Japan today. The first is Pure Land Buddhism that started in Japan much earlier, but was rejuvenated during this time. The second, Nichiren Buddhism, which was a little bit radical because a lot of aspects of Nichiren's personality were reflected in the religion. The last is Zen Buddhism, which is the most widely practiced form in Japan today. Many sects of Pure Land Buddhism were formed around the notion of Amida's or Amitabha's ability to save men and descend upon the dying and to take them with him. Amidism is a type of Buddhism that was based on utter reliance and faith in Amida as the only path to salvation. The only way a person can be saved is by reciting the Nembutsu, either aloud or silently, but there was a huge debate about having to say it once or many times. Honen founded Amidism because he thought of Amidism as a way to reproduce in literature the art and the blisses of the Pure Land and joy of Amida's descent. Shinran was Honen's disciple who founded the true sect of Pure Land Buddhism, which attracted the largest following. Shinran appealed to the peasantry and targeted them with his teachings. He also solved the debate about the Nembutsu, saying that it was only necessary to recite it once for salvation, and anything else was just a form of thanks and praise to Amida. Shinran preached the message of salvation through unquestioning faith in Amida. Nichiren Buddhism is said to be the only sect not derived from a religion in China, mostly because it was based on Nichiren's radical personality and beliefs. Nichiren believed that religious truth lay solely in faith in the Lotus Sutra, which contained the only unadulterated true Dharma, and all the others were wrong. Nichiren believed strongly in the idea of Mappo, or the age of degenerate Dharma, also known as the age of destruction. This idea was proven many times during the Kamakura period, when Nichiren predicted a Mongol invasion of Japan twice, and then it really happened a few years after his last prediction. He formed an apocalyptic view of Japan because he thought it was deteriorating from the inside. This seemed to be true, judging from the unusually large amounts of natural disasters during this time and the Mongol invasions, although they were defeated. Nichiren's personality greatly contributed to his religious ideas. Nichiren's distaste for other sects was made deliberately clear. Nichiren was often in trouble with the shogunate and even kicked out of Kamakura because of his radical ideas. He thought that the false doctrines of the other Buddhist sects were to blame for the Mappo occurrences. When asked how to defend Japan against the first Mongol attack, he replied that the shogunate should crush all other Buddhist sects because they had weakened and corrupted Japan. When he heard that the Mongols had been defeated, he even said, "It is a great pity that they should have cut off the heads of the innocent Mongols and left unharmed the priests of the Nembutsu, Shingon, Zen, and Ritsu, who are the real enemies of Japan." Nichiren also believed that there was no reason to read and understand the Lotus Sutra, but one only needed to recite the Nembutsu-like phrase referring to it. Nichiren is considered by some to be Japan's first nationalist because of his fanaticism and outspoken habits. The third major sect of Buddhism to be founded and stick during the Kamakura period is Zen Buddhism. The word Zen means meditation, which is one of the fundamental practices in Buddhism. Zen Buddhism was originally founded in India by Bodhidharma. It is said that Bodhidharma sat facing a wall in meditation for 9 years, and to keep himself from sleeping, he cut off his eyelids. In Japan, the popular Daruma doll was modeled after Bodhidharma. Zen Buddhism differs from Pure Land and Nichiren Buddhism because they are based on salvation, whereas Zen Buddhism is based on enlightenment. Enlightenment is the final realization that a person's suffering stems from the striving for such things as wealth and power, which are illusory and not real. Zen Buddhists seek personal enlightenment through discipline and effort to escape from suffering. There were originally two sects of Zen Buddhism that first became independent of each other during the Kamakura period. The first is Rinzai, which preaches sudden enlightenment. This means that enlightenment will come to an individual in a sudden flash of insight or awareness. Funded by Eisei, who in actual fact also introduced tea to Japan from China, and consequently the tea ceremony is a major cultural ritual in Japan. The Rinzai sect attracted intellectuals and members of the ruling class. Soto, the second sect, spread among the common people. Soto rejects sudden enlightenment. They believe that it is a gradual process attained primarily through seated meditation. In Zen, enlightenment is sought by dispelling delusion, and because language is considered to be one thing that deludes people the most, Zen Buddhists try to limit the amount of words they use. Many times, what they say does not make sense to the average person. For example, the use of the koan device for answering questions was often used between master and disciple. For this reason, Zen Buddhism attracted mostly intellectuals and not samurai warriors, even though its stress on control and self-discipline would have appealed significantly to the lifestyle and practices of warriors. Because of these new religions, past wars, and social changes, Buddhist art during the Kamakura period, along with more secular art, also took on different themes during this unique period. Art had to appeal to a wide range of people, including warriors, Buddhists, especially priests trying to spread Buddhism, and nobles. Many artists set about rebuilding and restoring Nara period buildings and works that had been destroyed during the wars. The Kamakura artists also developed their own styles. Realism or naturalism and the classical revival style became popular because of the war, and disasters of Mappo were common themes. The Kai school of art turned out some of the most prominent artists in Japanese history, including Unkai. The Kai sculptors created realistic sculptures, and art in general focused on naturalism. Sculptures of the guardians at Todaiji Temple in Nara were sculpted very realistically with intense faces and muscular bodies. The sculptures of sages and monks were also made to look very natural, as was the trend, which was started mainly by Unkai. In earlier periods, sculptures of people were more symbolic than natural. The sculpture of the monk Kuyu Shoin was a good example. He spent most of his efforts preaching the Nembutsu and was sculpted with a string of amidas coming out of his mouth. The symbolisms ranged from very unrealistic, like Kuyu, to the simple way the bodies appeared. Bodies were made to appear more hollow or frail because of the lifestyle a monk was supposed to lead. During the Kamakura period, however, bodies were much more lifelike, fuller, and naturalistic. Faces were given precise details. Unkai was a master at the Kai school who had artisans working underneath him. This was also a new trend during the Kamakura period, and it helped lead to the eventual affordability for the masses of art, but also led to a greater number of artists and a greater dispersion of art during the Kamakura period. Amida and related figures like Kanon were very popular themes in painting and in sculpture. Yoritomo, who had led the fight against the courtiers, was painted during this time in a way that was natural and new, but also showed off how powerful he was. The story of Ipin, who was a smaller-time religious leader during the Kamakura period, was also portrayed during a later time in an imaki, or scenes with dialogue and description so that everyone could understand the story. These imaki were also geared toward women who were not encouraged to learn the art of calligraphy